What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the December 28th edition of the NBA Lineup Generator video. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoneyDFS. And we have an 8-game slate tonight starting at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, so a half hour later than usual to get our lineups in. But we do have 8 games, and it looks like a pretty interesting slate. We've had Luka ruled out for Dallas. We just got Jimmy Butler and Kyle Lowry out for Miami. That's not going to be reflected in the video. It just happened. So obviously, that's something you're going to want to keep an eye on later. Tune into the deeper dive and live before lock shows on our YouTube channel for more up-to-date information on that. But we can still take an early look at this slate. I'm not sure that that's going to change too much. Miami was in a pretty unappealing spot. So obviously, they will look better, but probably not going to be top tier pieces across the board, just a bunch of playable pieces that we'll be able to talk about on those shows later on. So we're going to start with DraftKings. And as always, I'm going to walk through both of these, both sites, the slate on both sites using the lineup generator. But first, make sure that you like the video, give it a thumbs up on YouTube, give it a like on Twitter if you're watching it there. Also, if you're watching on Twitter, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you get an alert when our shows go live. Now, starting on the DraftKings side, as always, I'm going to go with contrarian lineups here. You have the option to choose different lineup types that you would like to see. If you're playing smaller field stuff, looking at chalkier lineups makes some sense, but I'm going to choose contrarian lineups for this video. Your next option is whether or not you want to lock a player into your lineups. This isn't something that I necessarily recommend doing if you're playing a lot of lineups. I like being able to see as many different lineups as I can. But if you're only playing one lineup or two lineups and you know that there's somebody that you want to play, you know that if you're presented with a lineup that doesn't have that player, you're going to discard it. Save yourself some time, click that player. For example, if that player is Andre Drummond, you click him here, and every lineup that you are presented with on this next page will have him in it. I skipped it for the purposes of this video. And then we get to the fun part. You start to see the lineups that you can play, the lineups that have been generated for you. And if you're not familiar with how this works, the lineup generator utilizes our player projections, ownership projections, simulation models, all of that stuff on the back end. It does all of the work for you. And then it presents you with individual lineups that we project to be profitable lineups over the long run. You then have the ability to save or discard those lineups if you like them or dislike them. If you save it, it gets saved, which is pretty self-explanatory. If you discard it, you are immediately presented with another lineup that we project to be profitable as well. So you have the ability to just choose the lineups that you want from profitable lineups that are presented to you. You can export up to 20 to DraftKings or FanDuel, whichever site you're playing on. And then on this page also where you have the lineups, you can see the total salary, fantasy points, and ownership up at the top for the lineup. Down at the bottom, we have sliding scales, which show you how the lineup compares to its alternatives. So this lineup projects pretty well. It's not overly chalky. Looks like a pretty good lineup. And then you get the player level data as well, the salary, fantasy projection, and ownership projection for each player. And then over on the right-hand side, these arrows give you the ability to customize your lineups. So you're being presented with a full lineup, but that doesn't mean you have to play the exact lineup that you're presented with. It's more fun to tinker around with stuff sometimes. And sometimes you just have a personal preference. You really like a lineup, but there's one or two things you would like to do differently. For example, if you looked at this lineup and you just really want LeBron James instead of Anthony Davis, to click the arrows next to Anthony Davis, you can swap him to LeBron James by clicking the arrows next to LeBron. And as easy as that, you have the same exact lineup, just with LeBron instead of Anthony Davis. And you can also, on this page where you're swapping players, you can quickly and easily see the fantasy projection and ownership projection for each player, the player that you're swapping out and the player you're swapping in. So in some cases, maybe you're looking at a lineup and you have, in this case, Anthony Davis projected for 30% ownership. We're playing him just because he projects really well. We already have a couple contrarian pieces in this lineup, so we don't really need to worry about his ownership. But in other cases, maybe he's 5% owned and he projects 3 points behind LeBron, but LeBron is 30% owned. In that case, you would want to be aware that you are swapping out one of your contrarian plays for another chalky play. So it's nice to have all of that information right in front of you, so that you don't make potential mistakes when you're swapping your lineups around. So now for this video, I'm going to just save the next lineups that show up until I have 20. And then we can go to the next page. And we have a really useful table on the right-hand side that allows you to quickly see your exposures to individual players. Obviously, as you are choosing your lineups, it's very difficult to mentally track how much of every given player you may have. So when you get to this screen, you can see that very easily. And it allows you to either decide that you're comfortable with what you have or that you want to make some changes. And in addition to being able to use these arrows, like I showed you before, Another easy way to customize your exposures is, let's say you're looking at this and you just don't want 40% DeMar DeRozan. Let's say you want 30%. If you click DeMar DeRozan's name, it'll be highlighted in yellow in the table, and all of the DeRozan lineups will move to the top in this column on the left-hand side and be highlighted in yellow. You can then decide which ones you like the least, whether that's by fantasy points, ownership, some other metric that you want to use, and delete those lineups. So here I'm just deleting the first two. And then you're going to go to get more lineups. You now have 18. Go grab 2 lineups that do not have DeMar DeRozan in them. And just like that, you're down to 30% DeMar DeRozan instead of 40. So very, very easy to adjust your exposures. Keep in mind that every lineup you're being presented with, we do project to be profitable, but the exposures that you have to different players still affects your risk. If you can choose 20 lineups that are projected to be profitable, but if they all have Anthony Davis, you're putting a lot of eggs into the Anthony Davis basket. And if he plays poorly, you're going to have a really poor return. If he plays well, you're going to maximize your return. So it really comes down from an exposure standpoint to figuring out a risk allocation that you're comfortable with. If you're comfortable just going all in on somebody, great. If not, you can adjust that and still be playing profitable lineups, just some that don't have the player that you already have a lot of. So really useful table on the right-hand side to be able to manipulate your exposures. And then looking at the individual players right now, Peyton Watson coming in 60% of the time. He is somewhat risky because we don't know exactly how Denver's rotation will play out, but Aaron Gordon is out tonight. My assumption is that Justin Holiday starts and Peyton Watson sees a bump off the bench without Gordon. He is 3,800, so looks like a good value. He's projected for about 19 to 20% ownership. Anthony Davis showing up in 50% of our lineups. He has power forward and center eligibility, so he's very easy to get into lineups tonight. He is projected for 30% ownership, as I mentioned before. Andre Drummond, one of the best center plays on the slate, 7,500, played 38.5 minutes in his start in place of Vooch last time out. He will once again be starting in place of Vooch and has a favorable matchup against Indiana. Very, very good fantasy point per minute guy. This is not chasing points just because he's 3K more than he was last time out. He was obviously mispriced last time, and there is still some value here. Duop Reith, 3,800, another risky value play. Certainly has a lot of potential, though. Over a fantasy point per minute this season. He played about 32 minutes off the bench in Portland's last game. Moses Brown got the start, but was basically just a spot starter, opened the game, opened the second half, never returned. There's no guarantee we see that same rotation, but at 3,800, if we even get 22 or 24 minutes from Reith, we're likely to be fine. If he does play 30 plus again, he's going to look very good. Justin Holiday is a terrible point per minute guy, but as long as he is starting, he is likely to play upper 20s in minutes. And at 3,200 with shooting guard and small forward eligibility, he just opens up a lot for us in our lineups. Derek Jones Jr. and Derek Lively both showing up 30% of the time from Dallas. Dallas has the potential to be a mess tonight. They have a tough matchup at Minnesota, very good defensive team. They have no Luka, they have no Kyrie. So we've already seen this happen several times this year where Dallas is shorthanded. It does make the players that are active look better, but you do also get the risk of their offense just being inept without Kyrie or Luka. We're getting to 30% DeRozan, 30% Simons. Both of those look fine. 30% Jamal Murray as well. Ayo Dosunmu showing up 25%. He is the perfect example of somebody that I would probably like to walk back a little bit. He's only getting about 2% ownership. So we're using him as a contrarian play in a lot of the lineups that I selected, but there's plenty of low-owned guys that you can find that are similar to Dosunmu. Don't necessarily need 25% of him. And then Moses Brown getting 25% there as well. I don't recommend playing him and Reith together. So that is something that you would want to pay attention to as you're selecting your lineups. But while we don't have any confidence in Moses Brown's minutes because he only played about 16 or 14 rather in the game he started last time, if he starts tonight, there is the potential for him to play more minutes. He could, start the game, close the first half, start the second half, and pick up an extra 6 minutes or so that way. He is a risky play for sure. I would rather get to Reith if I can only choose one, but Brown is showing up as a reasonable value as well. And now we can swap over to the FanDuel side. But first, as a reminder, you can sign up using the link in the description below on YouTube or in the tweet that follows this video on Twitter. This tool is $14.95 per week. You can use it up until lock to use the most up-to-date projections, simulations, all of that to improve your DFS lineups. I highly recommend checking it out. We created it with lower volume, single entry, 3 max, 20 max type players in mind, because we know that it can be very difficult to advance in this industry and make money at this game if you are playing lower stakes, because it can be expensive to get access to quality data, quality tools. And if you're just not playing enough money to recoup that investment, it's very tough to profit no matter how good the tools are or how good you are. And so we came up with this tool that it's utilizing all of our data, our models on the back end, and it's giving you the final results. And it should allow you to improve your DFS performance and hopefully eventually move up in stakes to a point where it makes sense for you to buy that full Sims package or buy the full data package, whatever it may be. Because you're able to play more volume because you've had so much success. But this is our starting point. Highly recommend it, especially if you are a single entry, 3 max, 20 max type player. Now, moving over to the FanDuel side, again, going to choose contrarian lineups and not lock anyone in. We should get some different exposures here since the rosters are different, pricing is different, all of that. Generally, pricing on FanDuel is a little bit softer than on DraftKings, although that may or may not be the case today. We are getting the 75% Jaden Hardy. He's 4,500 shooting guard eligibility. He is a good value here. Again, the range of outcomes is pretty volatile for him, but he should get more opportunities offensively without Luka and without Kyrie. Then we're getting to LeBron James 50% of the time. Jared Vanderbilt, $3,900 power forward, showing up 45% of the time. He's not an exciting play, but he is cheap. DeMar DeRozan, Patrick Williams, both showing up 40% from the Bulls. Malcolm Brogdon, 7K, 30% of our lineups, along with a $5,100 Herb Jones. Scoot Henderson is relatively risky off the bench for Portland. But he did play big minutes last game. He played well in that game. And Portland is shorthanded tonight with no DeAndre Ayton and no Shaedon Sharpe. So there are minutes available for Scoot Henderson, and he is inexpensive. So that looks pretty good. Andre Drummond at 8,900, only showing up 25% of the time compared to the 50% on DraftKings. He is projected to be lower owned on FanDuel. He's getting 11% ownership at 8,900. So much tighter pricing on Drummond there than on DraftKings, but still looks like a good play. We can use him as a contrarian play on FanDuel. He's more of just a top value on DraftKings. Moses Brown, already talked about, extremely risky. Don't love getting to him, but does have some potential upside. Zion at 7,900 is going to look good. He's in 20% of our lineups. And then Cody Martin played 25 minutes off the bench last game. That was a game without Brandon Miller. Brandon Miller is questionable today, but if he plays, it's still likely you're getting low 20s in minutes from Martin. If he's out, you could see a couple more minutes. And then one other thing to highlight, because I don't know that I've ever highlighted it in one of these videos before, but if you see a lineup turn red like this, it does mean that you have a player who is out. I mentioned at the top of this video that we had just gotten Miami news that had not been fully incorporated yet. This lineup does have Kyle Lowry, but he is out. You have him with a 0 fantasy point projection, and the lineup is red. So if around lock you are finalizing your lineups and you're looking through and you see something in red, take a look at it because you have somebody that you need to swap out. Other than that, that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for checking it out. Don't forget to sign up using the link in the description or the tweet below, and good luck on your lineups tonight.